Time is arguably our most valuable resource. With challenges facing us today such as irreversible, damaging climate change, now, more than ever, we need to make the best use of our time. But what if I told you that every single day we wake up and we reinforce a system that has been scientifically proven to stop us from doing so by biologically limiting us? A system which has been weaponized politically time and time again. I'm talking about time zones. In the last few decades, time zones have gone from being a standardized measurement of distance from GMT to a vastly complicated but fascinating display of political and economic alliances. The most recent example of this comes in 2011, when Kiribati leaped to the other side of the international date line and changed their time zone by a whopping 23 hours in order to match its oceanic neighbours Australia and New Zealand for business and political communications. But this begs the question, do we need new time zones? Or better yet, what if we got rid of them entirely? What if we were to implement a system of worldwide universal time, or UTC? To properly understand our need for a universal time zone, we first need to take a brief look at the history of standardized time. Every country in the world uses a time zone based on an hourly offset from GMT, a time zone based on the prime meridian that runs through Greenwich. GMT was first adopted in 1880 due to the emergence of railways and the various scheduling issues that a lack of standardized time brought about. Passengers would find themselves missing trains because clocks in different towns and cities would run a few minutes apart. By 1929, most countries had adopted a time zone based on an offset from GMT, but it took until 1986 for every country in the world to do so, with Nepal adopting a bizarre 15-minute offset, making their clocks run 5 hours and 45 minutes off from GMT. This odd deviation brings me to my next point. There's a lot wrong with our current time zones. Most of them don't even accurately measure time geographically whatsoever. Russia currently has 11 time zones, whereas China, for the sake of unity, has just one. Despite being only 1.8 times larger than China, Russia has 11 times the number of time zones. Clearly, this isn't an accurate system. Nowadays, the only purpose time zones serve are making political points. Our entire daily schedules are toyed with and changed by governments with no actual benefit other than making petty points. China recently arrested a Uyghur Muslim for having his watch set to Urumqi time, a local time zone used in the west of the country, where the sun rises and sets at a much different time to Beijing. Other countries have modified their time zones to show political independence. North Korea recently celebrated the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Korea from Japan by setting their clocks back half an hour, separating themselves from Japan and South Korea, and creating what they called Pyongyang time. Now, besides from being used as political weaponry, one of the other key problems with our time zones is that they wreak havoc on our bodies. Our bodies are regulated by dozens of internal circadian rhythms that dictate everything from when we feel hungry to when we feel awake and alert. These are in turn managed by our internal body clock, which is regulated by external factors such as light or dark or sunrise and sunset. Our time zones wreak havoc on this by forcing us to get up and work at times that don't match our internal body clock. People in Spain operate on Central European time, despite being quite far to the west. This puts their body clocks out of sync with their sunrises, which has been proven to lead to severe sleep deprivation. So I want to ask you, why do we have to put up with this? What can we do instead? Today I want to talk to you about a radical new idea that could potentially solve all these problems. UTC. UTC stands for Coordinated Universal Time. Now, you may be thinking none of those letters are in the right place, and you'd be correct. The acronym is actually a compromise between French and English speakers, a mix between Coordinated Universal Time and Temps Universel Cordon. Semantics aside, UTC is simply put a worldwide universal time zone. Every clock from the phone in my pocket to your grandfather's watch, all displaying the same time. If it's 6 PM in London, it's 6 PM in New York. UTC is actually already used worldwide by pilots, who refer to it as Zulu, which admittedly does sound a lot cooler. They use it due to the potential confusion with organising international flights across time zones. But the idea of adopting UTC worldwide was first popularised by two physicists, Steve Hanke and Richard Henry. They argued that with the rise of the internet, our time zones are irrelevant. With the internet obliterating time and space completely, due to the ability to communicate instantly across the world with anyone. They argue that our time zones were created far before this, when everything was local, which makes them redundant now. They also argue that time zones are purely used for political leverage nowadays, as I mentioned earlier. The main question surrounding implementing UTC is simply, why? Well, let me tell you. Implementing UTC and getting rid of our current standardized time zones will provide us with huge mental and physical health benefits by aligning our sleep schedules with our natural circadian rhythms, as our waking hours will finally reflect the sunrise and sunset pattern. It'll come back to benefit us in more ways than just our health as well. A recent study found in just 1 year, the US lost over $433 million in lost work due to unproductivity caused by time zone-related sleep disruption. Overall, it would make international communication so much easier. If I was to call my family in the US right now, I'd need to work out which of the 3 US time zones they're in, calculate the difference between there and here, and then figure out whether they'd be awake at that time. With UTC, all I'd need to do is work out whether they'd be awake at the time and give them a ring. It's simple, it's efficient, and it's the best fit for an international society such as the one we live in today. Obviously, there are some difficulties we may face in implementing UTC. It would require a radical shift in the way we think about time. When I first discussed this idea with friends and family, I was often met with confusion. Well, if it's 3 AM, wouldn't it be dark outside? Standardized time has become so intrinsically linked with the way we see our day. 3 AM means it's dark out, 7 PM is when you eat dinner, etc., etc. The change would also need to be adopted worldwide all at once. UTC will not work if a handful of countries are refusing to adopt it. So what do you think? Is it about time we change the way we think about time? UTC could be our ticket to becoming wealthier, healthier, and more well-rested. All we need to do is implement it. But I'll give you time to think about that for yourselves. Thank you for coming to my talk.